Hello there, Mandy here. Restorative Grief with Mandy Capehart is not just a podcast. It's also a book, a free online grief group, and a one-on-one private coaching practice. If you are interested in learning more, visit mandykapehart.com to find out how restorative grief can help you heal heart, mind, body, and spirit. Welcome back to Restorative Grief with Mandy Capehart. You are listening to episode 170, titled The Myth of Control: How to Flourish After Loss. Flourishing for me does not mean suffering for you. And if it does, then we are both doing it wrong. In my work as a grief expert, I help people heal from trauma and loss by exploring their own relationship to growth and flourishing. Because true flourishing isn't about gaining at someone else's expense. Instead, it begins when we release fear and control, both personally and collectively. In healing from grief, flourishing and suffering are often misunderstood. Grief can push us into survival mode, where fear drives our decisions. But flourishing is possible, even amidst profound loss. It just requires confronting fear and control. Tyler Vanderweel, a leading researcher on human flourishing, describes it as a state in which all aspects of our life, mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual, are thriving. Yet many of us hold back because we subconsciously believe that flourishing is scarce, as if someone else's well-being threatens our own. This scarcity mindset is born from trauma and traps us in cycles of anxiety and self-preservation. But flourishing is abundant, and it becomes possible for us when we release our need to control others, outcomes, and the unknown. Our pursuit of flourishing is often limited by this misunderstanding. Subconsciously, when we believe that someone else's well-being is a threat to ours, that belief is rooted in fear, trauma, and the need to protect ourselves. But let's unwind this fear-based foundation and refocus on the idea that flourishing means all aspects of life can be good. Start by asking yourself what good means to you. Is it ease, simplicity, or the absence of negative experiences? How we define good for ourselves is crucial. Without it, we may think that we're under threat of attack. We may project our values onto others, comparing our lives and theirs and using those comparisons to try and control their experience or our own. But comparison isn't a pathway into flourishing. As I've often said, individual healing is only possible within a healthy community, and a healthy community is only possible when we seek our individual healing. So if your community limits your understanding of good by fostering comparison, it might be worth considering whether this is blocking your path to flourishing. When we define good around mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual health, we are looking at our internal states. Does this mean areas will always be perfectly balanced in our inner worlds? Of course not. But recognizing what is good in these areas and having access to the resources needed to nurture them pushes us toward wellness and wholeness. So take a moment to assess your own life. How are you doing mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually? Are any of these areas what you would call flourishing? Are any of them in need of more support? See, in my experience, we lose sight of flourishing when we fixate on external conditions. There will always be times in life when our finances or our living situation feels uncertain. If your sense of spiritual health has only ever been expressed outwardly, for example, through actions or community, then any external disruption will naturally feel like an internal crisis. And without a shared definition of human flourishing, we cannot fight the fear-driven behaviors of control and subjugation. At Restorative Grief, I help guide people through the understanding that flourishing is possible even amid profound loss, but it requires us to redefine what flourishing means and confront our relationship with control of ourselves, of others, and of the world around us. Much of our suffering comes from trying to control outcomes that are beyond our reach. Our need for control is deeply tied to the nervous system's desire for security. And that makes sense, right? When life feels unpredictable, our sympathetic nervous system triggers a fight, flight, or freeze response, leaving us hyper-focused on others and overly concerned about our circumstances. But this state of vigilance, while helpful in crisis, is not conducive to a state of flourishing. As Vanderweel emphasizes, flourishing is not just the absence of suffering, it is the integration of our physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual selves into well-being. When we become aware of our control-driven suffering, constantly worrying about others or how their actions might impact us, we begin to recognize the root of that suffering. And this is awareness that is key because it creates space for choice. Will we remain in suffering or begin to move toward our own flourishing? Grief teaches us that control is an illusion. And I know that's not a lesson that any of us want, but it's here and it's real. We cannot force peace or demand others to act in ways that suit our desires. True flourishing invites patience, surrender, and trust in ourselves and in those around us. It does not rely on the suffering of others or on restricting their access to a wellness or supportive community. The fear of the unknown can be paralyzing, especially in grief, and relinquishing control may even feel cruel after a significant loss because the future feels so uncertain. But it is this very fear that keeps us locked in cycles of stress and hypervigilance, limiting our access and ability to flourish. Reflect on your own life for a moment. How much mental energy do you expend trying to anticipate or control future outcomes? Does any of it bring you peace? Vanderweel's work shows us that flourishing does not come from controlling others or outcomes. Instead, it is deeply connected to autonomy, an expression of freedom, and authentic relationships. Letting go of control doesn't leave us powerless, it frees us. One key aspect to flourishing is adopting a growth mindset. Psychologist Dr. Carol Dweck's research shows us that failure is not the end. It's part of the learning process. And people with a growth mindset, like the situations described above about external circumstances or financial challenges, are willing to see their challenges as an opportunity for growth and not as threats to their self-worth. In grief, a growth mindset helps us believe that flourishing is possible regardless of those external and shifting circumstances. And that's why assessing and understanding your internal states, your mind, heart, body, and spirit is crucial. Believing your life is good by your own definition comes from a mindset of resilience and growth. Speaking of resilience, emotional resilience is integral to healing in our grief. A fixed mindset, the opposite of a growth mindset, tells us that loss is inevitable and flourishing is too far off, probably impossible. It believes that the fear we face, the lack of control we have, and the grief we are carrying leaves us helpless and unable to grow or heal. But emotional resilience, when developed, helps us face our fear, release anxiety, and relinquish control over the future. See, grief work, it's about integration, right? How can we live through heavy emotions and move toward flourishing? Well, I love the work of Dr. Richard Tedeschi. His research on post-traumatic growth shows that even after trauma, flourishing is possible. In fact, people emerge with stronger relationships, a deeper appreciation for life, and a renewed sense of purpose. When fear governs us, we often try to control others to feel safe, to create safety and eliminate threats as often and as effectively as possible. But the myth of control is just that. It's a myth. Flourishing doesn't come from eliminating every threat. It comes from unconditional self-acceptance and building positive relationships, meaning, and accomplishments in our own life. So how do we flourish in the face of fear and uncertainty? How do we stop controlling others and begin releasing our suffering? Well, we begin by softening around our fear, approaching it with curiosity and compassion instead of anxiety, and pausing before reacting and trying to control or limit others. This creates space for growth, resilience, and joy. Developing a practice of mindful awareness can help. When fear or the need for control arises, instead of trying to strong-arm yourself or eliminating all action, simply observe it with compassion. Ask yourself, what might be true of this fear? And what does this fear need to soften? In your own time, you may even begin to ask what you can learn from this fear and who you are becoming in the aftermath of trauma or grief. Before we go, I want to revisit the definition of flourishing that we spoke of at the top of the conversation. According to Tyler Vanderweel, of course, flourishing is a state in which all aspects of a person's life are good. But flourishing requires a conscious effort to release that fear, let go of control, and to embrace a chance for growth. True flourishing doesn't come from eliminating all the threats or keeping everyone else at bay or controlling them in any way. True flourishing comes from recognizing that growth is possible, even through the challenges that scare us the most. And by practicing active mindfulness, adopting a growth mindset, and welcoming vulnerability, we can transform our fear into flourishing, one memory, one thought, one experience at a time. Thank you for listening to episode 170 of Restorative Grief. I get it. The fear of releasing control is something we feel in our bodies. But if control is the framework to building the fullest, happiest, healthiest version of your life, well, then why aren't you there yet? I'm a big believer in the embrace of uncertainty, and I hope this conversation on the value of working to transform your fear into flourishing invites a hopeful version of uncertainty into your life, even now. If this is the first time you've tuned into the podcast, thank you for joining me. I hope you'll continue to listen and take time to check out the show notes for links to Dr. Carol Dweck and Tyler Vanderweel's work, as well as the Patreon and workbook for this episode. Be sure to subscribe for future episodes and leave a review. I love hearing what you have to share. And finally, as always, one last thing before we go. Please remember, the only solution for grief is to do the work of grieving. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next week.